Penguin Random House Audio presents The Cartiers, the untold story of the family behind the jewellery empire, by Francesca Cartier Brickell, read for you by Hattie Morahan. Forward by Diana Scarisbrick. Many books have been written over the years on Cartier, but none have delved so deep into the true story of the family behind the firm. When the late Hans Nadelhofer published his pioneering history, Cartier, Jewellers Extraordinary, he told me how much he regretted having to work in the dark, handicapped by the lack of personal information about the members of the family who created this international empire, synonymous with 20th century elegance and luxury. Thereafter, although the exhibitions on Cartier over recent decades have shown so many beautiful objects, almost all the people most responsible for designing, making, and selling them have remained in the shadows. Now, the veil has been lifted, and the real story of the creation of Cartier has finally emerged. In this book, Francesca Cartier Brickell tells us of her dramatic discovery of old family letters, and her 10-year quest to fill the gaps in the family history and provide new insights into both the business and the private lives of the personalities involved. The Cartiers follows 4 generations, from Louis-François, the scholarly founder, to Jean-Jacques, the author's late grandfather, but at its heart are the 3 brothers, Louis, Pierre, and Jacques, whose close bond and distinctive individual contributions coalesced to create one great name and style in the early 20th century. Through their own words, unearthed by Francesca's impeccable research, we can understand how Cartier survived revolutions at home and abroad, 2 world wars, financial crises, and the catastrophic recession of the 1930s, when so many rivals went under. Their history consists of a series of innovations closely linked to changes in fashion, social mores, and the prevailing economic situation. Yet whether in the traditional garland style of the Belle Époque, the modernist Art Deco style, or the sumptuous style of the post-World War II period, every item, from the smallest tie-pin to the grandest tiara, was imbued with a look and finesse that were distinctly different from those of their rivals, and could be identified immediately as Cartier. As the great-granddaughter of Jacques and the granddaughter of Jean-Jacques, the indefatigable author has succeeded in bringing the Cartier story to life. No one could have done it better. Besides drawing upon the incomparable resource of her family's correspondence and journals, she has recorded many reminiscences from Jean-Jacques himself and tracked down veteran employees who recalled nostalgically that working for Cartier was like being part of a family. She has left nothing to chance, following in her forebears' footsteps from Paris, London, and New York to Sri Lankan sapphire mines and Middle Eastern bazaars. She has travelled to the palaces Jacques visited in India, met the descendants of his clients, and examined the jewels he sold them. Her achievement has been to synthesize 10 years of intense biographical research into an engaging and accessible account of the greatest success story of 20th century jewellery. Jean-Jacques would be immensely proud. Introduction. A few years ago, 4 generations of my family gathered at my grandfather's house in the south of France to celebrate his 90th birthday. As we all sat on the terrace that warm July morning, enjoying our usual holiday breakfast of fresh croissants and jam, I barely stopped to think how this wonderful man at the head of the table had lived through more than we could imagine. Born in 1919, Jean-Jacques Cartier had, like so many of his remarkable generation, witnessed cataclysmic world events firsthand. He'd seen the devastating lows of the Depression and fought in the Second World War. He had experienced more years of the Roaring Twenties than of the 21st century. And yet, that day, watching him open his birthday cards, he was simply Grandpa, with his neatly combed white hair and moustache and smiling blue eyes. But all that was about to change. I was just moments away from making a discovery that would bring me face to face with not only his past, but the lives of many of my ancestors. Finishing off the cafetiere of coffee, we made relaxed plans for the day. We wanted to spoil my grandfather, but he hated being the centre of attention. As usual, Grandpa just wanted the day to be about others. When we were younger, my siblings and I had been amazed at how he would rather give presents than receive them on his own birthday. One year, it had been a large wooden sandbox that suddenly appeared on his terrace. Another time, a couple of bikes on which we could tear around his garden. This year, he announced he had been saving a bottle of vintage champagne. Offering to fetch it for him, I headed down to his cellar. In the dim light, I scoured the shelves, and when I couldn't see the bottle, I began searching the rest of the room. My grandfather was known never to throw anything away, so there were plenty of things lying around, from boxes filled with manuals for long-defunct electrical appliances to cases of old clothes smelling of mothballs, along with umpteen copies of Horse and Hound magazine. Everything, it seemed, except the champagne. I was about to admit defeat and return empty-handed, when, just as I was leaving, I noticed a large trunk in the corner nearest the door. Like most other things down there, it was covered with dust and a random mix of objects. It seemed unlikely to house the missing champagne, but I was intrigued. I set to work removing a tall, thin metal wine rack holding a solitary bottle of out-of-date Orangina, and made my way past some yellowing 1970s newspapers until the travelling trunk was revealed in its full, battered glory. Black with brown leather straps, its surface was clear of any markings, but its sides held clues to a different era. Faded stickers from Parisian railway stations and exotic Eastern hotels. Kneeling, I carefully unbuckled the worn straps, willing them not to break off in my hands. And slowly, in that half-dark cellar, all alone, I lifted the lid. Inside were hundreds and hundreds of letters. They were neatly arranged into bundles, each pile tied with a faded yellow, pink, or red ribbon, and labelled in beautiful handwriting on a thick white card. My grandfather had been part of the fourth generation of the Cartiers to join the renowned family business, and the last of that generation to run a branch before it was sold out of the family in the 1970s. His father, Jacques Cartier, must have been the original owner of the trunk. Here, I realized, as I thumbed through the letters, was the story of a family firm that created some of the most revered jewelry of all time for the world's biggest names. That single case would, in time, open a window onto opulent Romanov balls, glamorous coronations, and extravagant Maharajas' banquets. Royalty, designers, artists, writers, politicians, socialites, and movie stars would spring to life. I was soon to learn how King Edward VII of England, Grand Duchess Vladimir of Russia, and Coco Chanel featured alongside the Duchess of Windsor, Elizabeth Taylor, Grace Kelly, and Queen Elizabeth II in Cartier's rich history. And how linking them all were the jewels. Emeralds as large as birds' eggs, ropes and ropes of perfectly pink pearls, cascades of rare-coloured diamonds, cursed gemstones, extraordinary sapphire tiaras, and the lightest, brightest diamond corsage ornaments. But the letters also told a very human story. As I would discover, along with accounts of diamonds and glamour, there were letters from homesick children and concerned parents. There were joyful telegrams on the birth of a baby, and grief-stricken ones carrying news of deaths. There were love letters, angry missives, and correspondence colourful with news and excitement from foreign lands. There were pages written in hope, and others scrawled in fear. There were words from a father offering guidance through new ventures, and there were airmail envelopes between brothers, squeezed full of shared problems, successes, and an unbreakable bond. My grandfather had sometimes spoken of old correspondence passed down from his parents, but he had never been able to find it. He was resigned to the idea that it must have been lost or mistakenly thrown out in his move to France. As I returned to him on the terrace, without the promised champagne, later to be discovered in a cupboard under the stairs, I was able to surprise him with a bundle of the letters he had assumed were lost forever. He was thrilled.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?